On a quiet morning in March 2003, just hours before the world changed forever, a convoy pulled up to the Central Bank of Iraq in Baghdad. There were no ski masks, no weapons drawn, just a signature from one man, Saddam Hussein. By sunset, nearly $1 billion in U.S. cash had disappeared. No alarms, no resistance. The largest bank heist in human history was complete. This is the true story of how one of the world's most brutal dictators pulled off the greatest robbery of all time, in plain sight, and how the world didn't even realize it, until it was too late. To understand how this heist was even possible, you have to go back to Iraq in the early 2000s, a country under the tight grip of Saddam Hussein, a place where the government controlled everything, from the media to the military, and especially the money. The Central Bank of Iraq wasn't just a financial institution, it was Saddam's personal safe. For years, Iraq had been crippled by sanctions, wars, and isolation. But Saddam's regime still maintained tight control over billions in oil revenue, most of it stored in cash due to banking restrictions. By 2003, tensions with the U.S. had reached a boiling point. George W. Bush was preparing to invade. Iraq was on the brink of collapse, and Saddam knew it. So he made a move that no one expected. Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq with fear, force, and absolute control for nearly 24 years. Born in a poor village in 1937, he rose through the ranks of the Ba'ath Party, and by 1979 he was president. By the 1990s he was known around the world as a ruthless authoritarian, willing to do whatever it took to stay in power. He survived assassination attempts, crushed rebellions, and even launched chemical attacks on his own people during the Halabja massacre. The man was not just a leader, he was feared like a god. And like many dictators, Saddam lived a life of unimaginable wealth and luxury. Gold-plated AK-47s, dozens of palaces, private zoos, portraits of himself towering over Baghdad. But behind that power was something else: paranoia. He didn't trust banks outside Iraq. He didn't trust international institutions. So instead of wiring money or storing it in foreign banks, Saddam preferred cash, physical dollars, billions of them. Saddam Hussein had full control of Iraq's financial system. The Central Bank of Iraq didn't operate like any other central bank. It wasn't independent. There were no checks and balances, no transparency. Orders came straight from the palace and were followed without question. It was said that Saddam personally approved large withdrawals, often using handwritten notes. The banking system was built to serve one purpose: keep Saddam rich and in power. Most of Iraq's oil revenue, especially after U.S. sanctions, came in the form of cash dollars, brought in secretly or under the radar of international oversight. Billions sat in the central bank's underground vaults, often in U.S. currency, stacked in boxes and wrapped in plastic. And as the war approached, Saddam made sure it was within arm's reach. In March 2003, the Bush administration announced its intentions loud and clear: Saddam Hussein must go. On March 19, 2003, the U.S. launched the first airstrikes on Baghdad in what would be called shock and awe. But something else happened that same week, far away from the cameras and air raids. On March 18th, just one day before the bombing began, Qusay Hussein, Saddam's eldest son, arrived at the central bank. He wasn't carrying a gun, he wasn't wearing a mask. All he had was a handwritten note. Signed by Saddam himself, the note instructed bank officials to hand over nearly $1 billion in cash. No one questioned it. No one dared. In a country where refusing the dictator's order meant death, the bank complied. Qusay and his guards loaded boxes of $100 bills, about $920 million in total, into 3 trucks and disappeared into the streets of Baghdad. The biggest bank robbery in world history had just happened, in daylight. The central bank never reported the theft. Why would they? In Iraq, the line between government orders and criminal acts was blurred beyond recognition. The only people who knew what happened were those who loaded the trucks, and those who drove away with the cash. The U.S. military only found out about the robbery weeks later, when troops started raiding Saddam's palaces and government offices. At first, they thought it was just abandoned wealth, forgotten in the chaos of war. But then the pieces started coming together. A note, a convoy, billions missing from the bank. It wasn't just greed, it was a strategic move. Saddam knew the war was coming. He needed to move fast and fund his escape, his militias, or maybe both. But what happened to the money? In the months that followed, rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the money was buried in the desert. Others believed Qusay smuggled it into Syria, Jordan, or even Switzerland. There were even whispers that some of it ended up in the hands of terrorist groups or black market arms dealers. But in June 2003, U.S. soldiers raided one of Saddam's palaces in Baghdad, and what they found shocked the world. Hidden behind fake walls and floor panels were hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. cash, 650 million, stacked floor to ceiling in bricks of $100 bills. That was part of the missing money, but not all of it. That meant at least $250 million was still unaccounted for, and to this day, it still is. The discovery of $650 million hidden in palace walls was one of the most shocking moments of the Iraq War. U.S. troops found the money inside Saddam's Babylon palace, stacked behind walls, under floors, and inside secret compartments. That cash haul would later become one of the largest battlefield recoveries in military history.
But what happened next only added to the mystery. Some of the soldiers who found the money were later arrested, accused of stealing some of the recovered cash. Millions reportedly disappeared between the discovery and the official transfer of funds. Investigations followed, but the fog of war made accountability almost impossible. As for Qusay Hussein, the man who carried out the heist, he was killed just 4 months later, in July 2003, during a gunfight with U.S. forces in Mosul. Whatever secrets he carried died with him. Even 2 decades later, the Central Bank of Iraq heist leaves behind more questions than answers. Where's the missing $250 million? Did Saddam plan to use it to flee the country, fund resistance groups, or simply stash it for a comeback? Did foreign governments, loyal insiders, or even family members take their cut? Some investigators believe portions of the money were laundered through black markets and shell companies in the Middle East and Europe. Others claim the missing cash was handed off to tribal allies to keep Saddam's network alive even after his fall. But there's no concrete proof. And with key figures dead, the truth may never come out. The money may still be buried in the Iraqi desert, rotting in basements, or long gone, flowing through the global underworld. The Central Bank of Iraq robbery wasn't just the largest bank heist in world history, it was also a symbol of absolute power, a final act of desperation by a collapsing regime. There were no guns, no hacking, no getaway cars. It showed how fragile systems become under authoritarian rule, where banks become piggy banks and laws mean nothing. And it left behind a trail of mystery, greed, and unanswered questions. What we do know is this: $920 million was taken, $650 million was found, $250 million remains missing. The mastermind, dead. The legacy, eternal. This was not just a robbery. It was the end of an empire. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. What do you think happened to the missing money? Stay tuned for more real-world crimes, untold war stories, and the dark side of history, only here. Thanks for watching.